State of Utah versus Tyler James Robinson. Could you state your name?
Tyler James Robinson.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Robinson.
Sometimes, the most haunting part of crime isn't the act itself. It's the silence that comes after. A single violent moment may last seconds, but the aftermath stretches endlessly, echoing louder than the gunshot or the struggle itself. In this case, the silence was suffocating. Tyler Robinson, the young man accused of killing Charlie Kirk, didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't lash out. He sat in custody for weeks, his face expressionless, his lips sealed as though nothing in the world could pull a word out of him. Prosecutors came forward quickly, confident they had built a compelling case. They spoke of forensic trails, of ballistic matches, of surveillance footage they claimed connected Robinson to the scene. Investigators whispered about motive theories, anger, political obsession, a simmering personal grudge. They tried to construct a story out of fragments, piecing together the why and the how. But Robinson himself, he gave them nothing. No confession, no denial, no attempt to explain what happened in that crucial moment when Charlie Kirk's life was taken. That silence wasn't neutral. It became its own shadow. It spread over the courtroom, the press conferences, and the living rooms of families glued to the nightly news. Every unanswered question seemed to multiply, leaving space for fear, for speculation, for a rumor. Was he refusing to speak out of guilt, or was he holding back because he knew something no one else did? Was he a cold-blooded killer, or a pawn caught in a story much bigger than himself? For Charlie Kirk's family, that silence was unbearable. For Robinson's family, it was confusing. And for the nation, it was chilling. In the vacuum of his words, people projected their own truths, desperate for resolution. But without his voice, the case felt less like justice moving forward and more like a wound that refused to close. Then, the silence broke. After weeks of withholding, of leaving families, investigators, and the entire country suspended in uncertainty, Tyler Robinson finally spoke. But the words that came from his mouth did not deliver relief or closure. They detonated like a bomb in the middle of the courtroom. Robinson confessed. Yet instead of offering a straightforward account, instead of admitting sole responsibility for the death of Charlie Kirk, he turned the narrative upside down. He said he wasn't acting entirely on his own. He said he hadn't just chosen this path by himself. He claimed influence. He claimed he was sent. Those statements rippled outward like shock waves. What did he mean? Sent? Sent by whom? Was this the product of coercion, of indoctrination, of someone pulling strings in the shadows? Robinson wasn't describing a solitary decision. He was painting a picture of manipulation, of a larger force behind his actions. And suddenly, this wasn't just about one man's crime. It wasn't just about Tyler Robinson standing in a courtroom accused of murder. It became something far bigger, a suggestion of conspiracy, of orchestration, of dark influences hidden behind curtains the public couldn't yet see. The prosecution's clean narrative began to fracture. If Robinson was telling the truth, then the story of this murder stretched far beyond his own hands. It pointed to others, mentors, agitators, unseen figures who may have encouraged, directed, or even commanded what happened. And if he was lying, if this was only a desperate ploy to muddy the waters, then why lie in such a specific, dangerous way? For investigators, Robinson's confession complicated everything. For the public, it was terrifying. The killing of Charlie Kirk could no longer be read as one man's violent outburst. It might have been a message, an act with authors whose faces hadn't yet been revealed. That single claim shifted the weight of the case from a personal tragedy to the possibility of a coordinated darkness, one that might still be operating in silence. Robinson described pressure. He described persuasion. He painted himself as a man pushed into a corner, someone whose thoughts had been shaped and twisted until the act of killing felt not like a decision, but an inevitability. According to his confession, there was someone whispering in his ear, planting the seed, watering it with rhetoric, and reinforcing the idea until it became a distorted reality he could no longer resist. He insisted that this wasn't just his burden, that the crime was born from manipulation, not free will. But investigators weren't convinced. Long before his confession, they had already pieced together evidence that told a very different story. hidden clothing discovered in a locked compartment, weapons stashed where they wouldn't easily be found, digital trails showing searches about police tactics, about how to avoid detection, about what to do if authorities came too close. There were text messages, too, fragmented but chilling, hinting at planning, preparation, and careful steps designed to carry out an attack. These weren't the signs of man being dragged unwillingly into someone else's plan. They were the markers of intent. And that contradiction cut right to the heart of the case. Was Robinson truly a manipulated pawn, someone who fell under the sway of forces greater than himself? Or was that just a story he spun to dodge responsibility, to reframe himself as a victim rather than the architect of violence? The physical evidence suggested deliberation. The messages pointed to premeditation. But his words painted him as a man under control, someone pressured until he broke. So which is it? Was he the calculating planner, choosing every move, hiding, preparing, waiting for the right moment? Or was he the puppet, his strings pulled by unseen hands, carrying out a mission that was never truly his? The truth may lie somewhere in the uneasy space between both possibilities, a place where personal intent and external influence collide in a way that makes a line between choice and coercion almost impossible to see. Prosecutors wasted no time in framing Robinson's words as a calculated strategy. To them, his sudden confession was not an act of honesty, but carefully constructed attempt to rewrite history. They argued that Robinson, cornered by mounting evidence and knowing conviction was looming, was now trying to muddy the waters, introducing doubt, introducing shadows, hoping the jury would see him less as a killer and more as a victim. In their eyes, his story being manipulated was nothing more than a convenient invention, a narrative designed to dodge responsibility for an act he had planned, executed, and now sought to escape. But his defense painted an entirely different picture. They spoke not of calculation, but of exploitation. They described Robinson as vulnerable, impressionable, a man whose personal struggles and fragile state of mind were weaponized against him. According to them, Robinson wasn't masterminding a murder. He was being steered, step by step, by influences that knew exactly how to bend him to their will. The defense framed him as a casualty of manipulation, not malice, a man broken down, not built up to commit violence. Caught between these clashing narratives were the investigators. Their job wasn't to pick sides, but to sift fact from fiction, and Robinson's confession forced them into careful steps. Was he finally revealing the truth, peeling back layers of conspiracy? Or was this a classic misdirection, an attempt to shift focus away from himself and onto phantom figures no one could prove existed? They examined his words, his behavior, and the timeline with skepticism, knowing that a single false lead could derail the pursuit of justice. The divide was clear. Prosecutors saw guilt. The defense saw exploitation. Investigators hovered in the middle, balancing possibility against probability. And yet, with all the voices shouting their version of the truth, one thing remained constant. The answers themselves were elusive, hiding just out of reach, as if the case was determined to resist resolution. Beyond the courtroom walls, Robinson's confession does more than shape the fate of one man. It forces us to look at a far larger, more uncomfortable reality. His words pull us into questions that reach far beyond evidence files and legal arguments. They force us to confront the dangers of manipulation, the frightening power of influence, and the echo chambers where anger doesn't just simmer. It mutates, intensifies, and eventually transforms into violence. Think about it. If Robinson was telling the truth, if he truly was sent, then we are no longer dealing with a single crime committed by a lone actor. We are looking at the possibility of an unseen network, people who plan ideas and groom individuals to carry out the violence they themselves would never risk committing. That's the unsettling possibility, that others may still be out there, pulling strings, identifying the vulnerable, and pushing them toward acts that fracture communities and destabilize lives. But if Robinson wasn't sent, if this story is only a desperate attempt to shift the blame, then his words still matter for another reason. They reveal just how fragile truth can be when silence finally cracks. In one stroke, he demonstrated how easily blame can be redirected, how swiftly responsibility can be blurred once the accused begins to speak. A confession, something meant to bring clarity, instead created deeper chaos, reminding us how narrative can be just as powerful as evidence in shaping perception. And that is the real weight of this moment. The recognition that whether Robinson was manipulated or simply manipulating others with his words, the lines between guilt, influence, and accountability are far thinner than most of us want to believe. In either case, the story becomes bigger than Robinson alone. It becomes a warning about the worlds people build in isolation, the voices they choose to believe, and the ease with which silence, once broken, can turn into a weapon of its own. So now, the silence that once defined this case is gone, but what replaces it isn't clarity. It's a labyrinth of new uncertainties. Robinson has spoken, yes, but his words have opened doors that lead into darker, more complicated hallways. The mystery is deeper than ever. Was he truly sent? Was there really a guiding hand behind his actions? Someone or something that planted the seed of violence and nurtured it until it bloomed into tragedy? Or is Robinson himself the architect of deception, weaving a new story to shield himself from the full weight of accountability? Every possibility carries its own danger. If Robinson is lying, then his confession becomes a smokescreen designed to distract and destabilize, to force investigators to chase phantoms while the simple truth, premeditation and personal choice, sits right in front of them. But if he is telling the truth, if influence really played a role, then the implications are chilling, because that means Robinson is not unique. It means there may be others just as vulnerable, others waiting the wings, living in the same echo chambers, consuming the same poisonous rhetoric, susceptible to the same kind of pressure that could turn doubt and anger into action. In the end, Robinson's confession doesn't close the case. It expands it. It widens the lens, forcing investigators, prosecutors, and the public to consider not just a man in custody, but the possibility of networks, ideologies, or individuals still operating in silence. The questions multiply instead of resolve, demanding vigilance rather than relief. And so, the search for truth doesn't end here. It pushes forward, deeper into every lead, every message, every shadow that might hold an answer. Until those threads are pulled, until the silence surrounding the hidden players, real or imagined, is broken, the case will remain unfinished. Justice, in this story, is still waiting to be found.